you can imagine if I had a tab here. Actually, let me get a piece of paper or something. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you my experiences with fake LSD. So for instance, when I've tried to get real LSD and ended up with some other research chemical that was not LSD 25, such as the NBOMe or DOx series. So while I can't say for sure that they were not actually LSD, and I can't say exactly what they were, I can explain my suspicions and red flags as to why I thought this was so. So I do want to say a disclaimer that what I'm about to say may not be exactly accurate or correct, but if you think I am wrong, definitely leave a comment and explain why. This is still a learning process for me, and this is all just based on my experiences and what I've researched so far. My experiences with LSD have all been on blotter paper, so this video will be around blotter paper. I can't speak for gel tabs or liquid LSD or any other form of LSD. Alright, let's get started. So the most common advice that you'll see in figuring out whether or not your LSD is real is to use test kits. I forgot where I got my test kits. I think they're from DanSafe or TripSafe, but I'll leave a link in the description. One thing I would say is to get different kinds of tests. So the most common test kits for LSD, and I'm so sorry if I pronounce these wrong, are Ehrlich, Marquis, and Mech. And the reason that you want different kinds of tests is because each test is reductive, so it will be able to tell you what it is not, but it won't be able to tell you exactly what it is. So if you use different test kits that are testing for different things, then you're more likely to be more confident that what you do have is LSD. For instance, the Ehrlich test tests for the presence of an indole ring, but this indole ring can be present in other substances. And I've even heard of people who will put serotonin on the blotter paper so that it'll pass these tests. Now that's a lot of work, so I don't know if that's actually a thing that happens. The Ehrlich test turns this like purplish pink color when it has the presence of the indole ring. That doesn't really say that you have LSD. It just says there's an indole ring here, and LSD has indole rings, so that's a good sign. To do these tests, what you'll do is cut off probably a fourth or a half of your tab would be sufficient. Thing is, each tab could be dosed differently, so one side of the tab may have more than the other, so it's probably better to get as big as a surface area as you can. Then what you do is ideally on something like ceramic, or some of these tests also come with test tubes, but I find it kind of hard to see what the resulting color is when it's in the test tube. So on top of ceramic, you drop the solution and see what color it turns into. These tests usually come with a color guide to help you determine what might be on your tabs. So one thing that's kind of frustrating for me about these tests is even though I have this color guide with LSD, it's supposed to turn this purplish pink, but sometimes that color can be quite faint, and I am still not able to tell if that's a strong indicator or not. I think this is a common experience because if you go to the subreddit reagent testing, you'll get a bunch of pictures of people who have done these tests and asking, what do you think this is? However, if you're testing your LSD and it's some other totally weird color, then that's a pretty good indicator that you do not have LSD. So apart from test kits, or if you don't have test kits, I also examine the actual blotter paper that it comes in, and one thing is the size of the tab. Usually LSD is on tabs that are 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch dimension. If it is that size, I'd say that's a good sign. If it's any bigger than that, then I'd say that is a red flag that it may not be LSD. Other research chemicals may need a larger active dose, so you need more of it versus LSD, which is in micrograms. These may be up to milligrams, and they need a bigger blotter paper to actually fit anything that will make you trip. But just because the tab is bigger does not mean that it is not LSD. For instance, in Europe, tabs there are usually 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, so they'll be bigger, but they could have real LSD. And there are reputable tabs out there that are real LSD that are 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter as well. So remember, smaller does not necessarily mean real LSD. Bigger does not necessarily mean not real LSD, but smaller is usually a good sign. Bigger, usually a red flag in my experience. Next is the actual design on the tab. Sometimes I see people online posting pictures of their tab and asking if it's real. So I wouldn't trust the blotter paper designs to determine if it's real or not. Usually people buy the blotter paper from the same source, so the people laying the LSD are not necessarily the same people who are making the blotter paper or the designs on it. Unless, maybe if this other person who is in your area have the same design and they say that theirs is real, maybe that's a better indicator that yours is too, but I would not trust the designs at all. With that said, there are designs that are kind of a red flag to me, and that's actually the lack of a design. Tabs that are just white, the front and back, these are called white on white tabs. Whenever I get these, it's a red flag. Usually these are not real LSD for me. Now, I have heard other people say white on whites are the best you can get, or they're really great. That hasn't been true for me. So whenever I see white on white, I'm immediately suspicious. Of course, that doesn't mean if you do have white on white tabs that they're not LSD. They very well could be. It's just a red flag for me. The next red flag I have is if the blotter paper has no perforations. So perforations are kind of like the holes along the lines of the tab that make it easy to fold and tear the tab off. Or if the tab just has lines on it to indicate where you can cut with scissors on the blotter paper, that's fine too. But if there's no indication at all where the tab ends, again, no idea for me where to cut the tab, that is a red flag to me. I'm a big proponent of knowing my dosage, so having an idea about how big each tab should be is really important to me. Of course, I could draw on the tab, but it just makes me very distrustful of whoever laid it, that they gave no indication for this. When I have gotten these tabs, sometimes they are already cut, but they're different sizes. Blotter paper design doesn't matter too much, but if it is white on white or it has no perforations or no indicators where to cut, then I consider that red flags. So another thing to take into consideration is the thickness of the blotter paper. Okay, I have this piece of paper. It is not to real scale, but we'll pretend it's a tab. With real LSD, when I bend it, it won't be as pliable as this, but it will still be pretty bendable. Probably like it doesn't give me much resistance when I try to fold it. Now with fake LSD, the paper is pretty stiff, so if I try to bend it, gives me a lot of resistance. The reason I think this is because as I hear, real LSD will crystallize less than other research chemicals that may have greater density when they're crystallized, making the paper they're on firmer. And that makes sense to me, but of course I could be wrong about that. Now it's time to actually try out your new batch of potential LSD. One thing I highly recommend is to only start with at most half a tab of this new batch. I would not go more than 1 tab. This is because with real LSD, you can take a lot of it, you won't die. You might just really have an intense trip. But with research chemicals, the amount to take where it's lethal is actually quite low, and it could be as little as 2 tabs. So at most 1 tab to be safe. Another thing is some research chemicals can have a very long duration. If you take more, it'll last longer. When I get a new batch, I actually like to start off with 1/4 of a tab. 1/4 of a tab I've done with real LSD, and I know for myself about what that experience should be like. I'm able to calibrate from that. Then if I'm confident enough, or if I want more information, I'll go up to 1/2 a tab. After 1/2 a tab, for me, I can say with good confidence if it's real or not. With research chemicals that are not LSD, I do not enjoy the experience at all, so I really have no desire to do it again. So it's pretty easy for me not to want to take a full tab of it, or another 1/2 tab even. But once I am feeling good that it is real LSD, I'll move on to 1 whole tab, which usually tells me with certainty if it is real or not. But anyway, if you do have real LSD around, I would recommend trying out a 1/2 tab dose and getting familiar with how that feels like, so that when you get new batches, you can use that as a counter example to whatever new batch you get to see if the experiences match up. One other thing, with new batches though, even if it is real LSD, they could be at different strengths. It could feel weaker or stronger, but it's still within the same scale if it is LSD, if that makes sense. Whereas if it's not real LSD, then it's like a totally different scale. Another thing I would recommend is to swallow right away not right away, and I'll explain what to do in the few seconds or milliseconds before you swallow, but don't leave it under your tongue, don't bite into it, just swallow it. Real LSD will still work if you just swallow it directly. It may mean that the come up may take longer to hit and it may be slower, but that's totally okay. If it is fake LSD, other research chemicals, they could still be active if you just swallow it, but there are research chemicals that need to be left under your tongue for them to work really. Those won't work if you just swallow it. So if the person who gave you these tabs told you you need to leave them under your tongue, that is a huge red flag. Huge red flag. Alright, so I said to swallow right away, but there is something to do before you swallow, and that's to pay attention to the taste of the tab. A common saying is if it's bitter, it's a spitter. So if you taste any bitterness, actually I would not recommend to swallow, just spit it out. I've heard this bitterness described as like battery acid. Like, it is very, very obvious. It has such a strong taste. You can't mistake it. I've never actually come across anything to that bitterness. So real LSD is said to be tasteless, though you may still taste a bit of bitterness, and that may just be the ink of the blotter paper, but real LSD should not have a really strong taste. Another thing to look out for is any numbness. So some people report that they feel numb in the place where they put the tab in their mouth. That might be the cheeks or the tongue. So at this point, you've taken the potential LSD, and now it's time to wait for it to kick in. Usually, depending on the dosage, real LSD should kick in about 20 minutes to an hour and a half-ish. So if you take less, then it'll take longer to really hit. If you take more, it takes faster to hit. There are research chemicals that still have the same onset about as LSD, but there are others that could take longer, like more than 2 hours, maybe even more than 3 hours. That is a big red flag that you do not have real LSD. Or if you swallowed it directly and nothing is happening, that is a huge indicator that you do not have real LSD. once the effects have started in, I find that research chemicals are some sort of terrible parody of real LSD. You know, I do get visuals, but the visuals are quite flat and not very multi-dimensional, and I don't really find things beautiful either. Music, usually on LSD, sounds really nice to me, but on research chemicals, they just sound like music, maybe even sinister. Usually research chemicals give me a big body load. I just feel heaviness. My muscles feel stiff. My joints when I move feels really weird. My hands feel fat, and my mouth is numb, and you know, moving it around, it's just weird. The experience on research chemicals is not magical, it's not mystical, it's not introspective, for me anyway. I do know there are some people who enjoy research chemicals and find them to be magical or mystical or any of those things, but for me, it's mostly a body high. My headspace is still pretty clear. Maybe if I took more, I've never taken more than half a tab of research chemicals, so maybe if I had taken more, it would have gotten more trippy, but on half a tab, or about 50 micrograms to a fourth tab, about 25 micrograms of LSD, I can find beauty in things. So music even is like slightly nicer on the lower doses of LSD. I feel a bit more introspective and connected to the universe and all of that with real LSD, even on small doses. So this is kind of how I can tell with not real LSD that even on small doses, it is not the same experience. Another thing that is something that might just happen to me, although apparently Albert Hoffman also had a sort of aftertaste with LSD, but I get a very distinct aftertaste about 3 hours into taking LSD. It's really hard for me to describe what it tastes like. Maybe a bit, I don't know, metallic-y, but not really metallic. But it always happens to me with real LSD. For other research chemicals, this happens. Either I never get the aftertaste, or the aftertaste comes on way longer into the trip. So if it doesn't happen within 3 hours, I'm like, Some people have told me that the differences with, you know, LSD, when you have a higher body load, things like that, could be due to the impurities of the LSD. And I don't know much about this, but supposedly if the LSD is more impure, that could lead to rockier body load, not a smooth experience. I don't know how true that is. Last thing to note is how long the trip is. So with real LSD, depending on how much you take, if you take maybe 50 micrograms, that'll be about, for me, it's different per person of course, but for me that usually starts to end about 6 hours in. Of course, I don't feel normal till the next day. Whereas if I take more than that, I might be tripping into the night, maybe 12 to 16 hours in. Of course, it dies down within 12 hours though, and then the rest is kind of like trailingness of the trip. With research chemicals, there are research chemicals that last as long as real LSD does, but there are also research chemicals that last a long time. These I've heard can last maybe around 30 hours. If you're still feeling things into the middle of the next day and even the day after that, that's a pretty big red flag that you do not have real LSD. So after all of this, I am fairly certain whether I have real LSD or not. If I have real LSD, I rejoice. And if I don't, you know, so you can either throw them away or give them away to people as long as you make it clear that it's probably not real LSD and to be really careful with it. Sometimes people are totally fine with it and they'll take it anyway. It's not good to like flush it down the toilet or anything like that, as it can go into the water systems and stuff. Well, that's all I have for this video. I hope you found it useful. I'm definitely open to any feedback. If you've had similar experiences to me, I'd be really interested in that. Or if you disagree with anything that I've said, I'd love to hear that as well. As I said, it's a learning experience for me. This is kind of what I've picked up in the 5 years that I've dealt with these kinds of substances. And if we were talking in real life and you asked me about this is what I would tell you. So thank you for watching, and I cannot encourage you to go do this stuff, but if you are, I really hope that you do it safely and responsibly and respectfully. So till next time, bye.